Assistant Professor in the Classics Department. I'm taking over today from my colleague Cliff Ando and welcoming you to the third of this 4-lecture series. Though I am delighted to have Tim Whitmarsh, the A.G. Levantis Professor of Greek Culture at Cambridge, with us today. Since he has already been introduced beautifully by Cliff, I won't reiterate his many accolades, achievements, and his contributions to scholarship, but I will give you a short recap of his previous 2 talks on Homer and the land. And here I have the pleasure of simply quoting Professor Whitmarsh himself, who reported to his 2,000 Twitter followers last week that he would be giving the second of his Chicago lectures, and added, "Both have turned out to be about sticks. Who'd have thunk it?" In fact, however, what Professor Whitmarsh has done is to take hold of the Rhapsode staff, a deceptively simple tool, and show how this one object can provide entry into the many layers of narrative, image, and meaning in the Iliad and the Odyssey, opening up entirely new lines of inquiry on the embodied and performative spaces of these epics. I expect that today's talk, entitled Mingling in Love, will be no less stimulating. Please join me in welcoming Professor Whitmarsh.
Thank you very much for that, another generous introduction. I want to start off today by talking a little bit more about sticks. What I want to talk about is Odysseus' crossing of the river Styx into the underworld. See what I did there? This journey seems oddly undermotivated. Circe simply says, you must go, Chre, to consult Chre son Menus, the ghost of Tiresias, a clear play on words. In the underworld, Odysseus learns of another undermotivated journey. Tiresias tells him that once he's killed the suitors, he must now journey in the future to a land where they do not know the sea and make sacrifice before returning home to his death. And this is passage number 1 in your handouts. But when you've slain the suitors in your halls, whether by guile or openly with the sharp sword, then the oar, until you come to men that know nothing of the sea and eat their food unmixed with salt, who in fact know nothing of ships with scarlet chiefs, or of shapely oars, which are a vessel's wings. And I will tell you a most certain sign, which will not escape you. When another wayfarer, on meeting you, shall say that you have a winnowing fan on your stout shoulder, then fix in the earth your shapely oar, and make handsome offerings to the Lord Poseidon, a ram, and a bull, and a boar that mates with sows, and depart for your home and offer sacred hecatombs to the immortal gods who hold broad heaven, to each one in due order. And death shall come to you yourself away from the sea, the gentlest imaginable, that shall lay you low when you are overcome with sleek old age, and your people shall be dwelling in prosperity around you. This is the truth that I tell you. This is a much discussed passage that we cannot fully unpack here, not least because the Muses, like the Muses' lies like the truth, it's couched in the form of hieratic discourse that's designed specifically to resist full unpacking. But let me dwell for a while on the way in which the projected future journey seems to replay and re-emphasize certain aspects of Odysseus' return to the Ithacan household. In particular, the certain sign, the sem mal ariphrades, generated by the oar, reprises the certain signs of the bow and the trees, all of fashioned wooden implements, all embodied physically in the staff held by the rhapsode. In our case, perhaps paradoxically, it's not a recognition, as with the bed, but a misrecognition that constitutes the sure sign. Odysseus' interlocutor will take the oar for a winnowing fan. But is it really a misrecognition, or is it an acknowledgement of the fact, which I've been emphasising in previous lectures, that wooden sticks can play multiple roles in different situations? The rhapsodic stick exists precisely to signify many different things, to be an open-ended sermon. So the clear sign generated by the stick here is precisely not that it has a single meaning, but that different people in different contexts take it in a different way. So Odysseus is to fix the oar stick in the ground. Gaer pexas tu eres eretmon. He is to perform sacrifices to Poseidon and then to return home by Cada, to sacrifice to all of the gods. The fixing of the stick, coupled with the distinct sacrifices to Poseidon, clearly represent the end of Odysseus' sea travels, his fixity in space, and the expiation, of course, of Poseidon's anger caused by the blinding of the Cyclops. These moments also, however, represent the final return, final in terms of narrative chronology, of the mobile rhapsodic stick to the earth, its symbolic re-racination, the exhaustion of its dynamism, the closure of the epic project itself, the final grounding of signification. I've been arguing in these lectures that the Homeric poems are designed to make abstract themes real, material, and available to the senses and emotions through the mediation of rhapsodic performance. The figure that audiences had in front of their eyes and the objects he wielded were supposed to embody the poetic issues for them in their world. So what do we make of Odysseus' last journey, this symbolic extension of the discourse of rootedness beyond the end of the poem? How does this signify for our audiences? Now, the opposition between land and sea has long been recognised as one of the structuring forces of the Odyssey. The sea, the province of hostile Poseidon, represents uncertainty, instability, insecurity, anonymity. The land, by contrast, represents stability, identity, family, what I've called rootedness. This opposition is reinforced and further explored through a series of contrasts between the land desiring Odysseus and various marine beings, particularly the Phaeacians and the Phoenicians, who, as it's also long been observed, are near homonyms and seem to function in the Odyssey as obverse and reverse of the same transmarine coin. The fictitious Phaeacians, that's to say, function as benevolent doppelganger of the rascally Phoenicians. That opposition works to the disadvantage of the Phoenicians, who were, of course, the Greeks' primary competitors on the trade routes across the Mediterranean at the time of the poem's composition. As more generally, does the contrast between the land-seeking Odysseus and the seaborne peoples as a whole. Trading may be the Phoenicians' métier, but aside from the odd Sidonian cup mentioned here and there in treasure catalogues, Phoenicians seem to take more from the Greeks than they give back. And now we look at the passages under number 2 on the handout. Odysseus' lie to Eumaeus features a Phoenician with cunning in his mind, Apatelia eidos. Elsewhere, Phoenicians are fitted with the epithet polypaipoloi, crafty, clear play on the Iliadic designation polydaidoloi. Only once, and in exceptional circumstances, do we hear of noble Phoenicians. Elsewhere, they're associated with unwilled sea travel. Like storm winds, they represent unpredictable forces that transfer individuals with sudden rapidity from place to place. As, for example, with poor Eumaeus, Odysseus' swineherd, abducted as a child by Phoenician traders from the island of Syria. We might note in this connection that the prophecy of the last journey in the passage 1 in your handout describes the ships unrecognised by the island inhabitants as phoinico pareus, with scarlet cheeks. Of course, a common enough epithet for ships, but one that carries with it a reminder that ships are a particular speciality of the Phoenicians, who gained their Greek name from the red dye, the phoenix farmed from crustaceans in the region. It's often been said, however, that Odysseus has something of the seaborne trader about him. In Book 8, the contentious Euryalus mocks him for looking more like a merchant than an athlete. This is passage number 3 on your handout. No, stranger, for you do not look to me like a man who knows contests, such as abound amongst men, but like one who, faring to and fro with his benched ship, is a captain of sailors who are merchantmen, one who is mindful of his freight and keeps close watch on his cargo and the gains of his greed. This comparison is, of course, disproved by Odysseus' subsequent actions, which demonstrate his athletic vigour, but it also offers an interesting expansion of the curd root, profit. It's elsewhere used of Odysseus in a positive way. He's designing, he's crafty, as Athena calls him. But the cunning Odysseus does have something of the profiteer about him, and this hints at a fundamental ambivalence contained within this complex figure. When he tells of his approach to the land of the Cyclopes, he notes an island on the approach that lies uncultivated. For these Cyclopes, he says in passage number 4 on the handout, don't have vermilion-prowed ships. So he says, neither with flocks is it occupied, nor with ploughed lands, but unsown and untilled all its days. It is bereft of mankind, but feeds the bleating goats. For the Cyclopes have at hand no ships with vermilion cheeks, nor are the shipwrights in their lands, who might build them well-bent ships, which could perform all their wants, passing to the cities of other men, as men often cross the sea in ships to visit one another. Craftsmen who might have made of this island a well-arranged settlement for them. For the island is not at all a poor one, but would bear all things in season. This represents to the resourceful, profiteering, if you like, Odysseus, an opportunity mixed. It's not a bad island, it would bear things all in season. As Carol Doherty, amongst others, has noted, he surveys its potential economic yield, its anchorage, its plentiful fresh water, its edible fauna, in the way that a colonist would. And when he presently arrives on the Cyclopes' own island, his motivation in wanting to meet Polyphemus is again rooted in a desire for gain, for profit. I want to see whether he would give me guest gifts, he says, they near. Even if, he ruefully notes at that moment in retrospect, it would have been more profitable, Cur on, to have left immediately. In moments like this, he seems to speak the language of the sea-born centrifugal traveller, the marine opportunist. So what's happening here? Why is the otherwise nostalgic, home-loving Odysseus tempted by the opportunities offered at sea? For Doherty, and from a different perspective, Iran Malkin, the Odyssey contains two levels of cultural discourse, one purporting to describe a Bronze Age heroic quest, and the other a reflection of contemporary archaic culture, which was preoccupied with trade, overseas expansion and colonisation. And I think this must be right up to a point. This, after all, is in essence, a thinly-eyed consensus that we've reached in modern Homeric scholarship. The poems do reflect in the margins, as it were, of the contemporary world. But it's not the whole story. Doherty's argument is based on the claim that the ship on which Odysseus travels is the dominant meta-poetic image, so that the impulse towards exploratory journeys runs pretty much with the grain of the poem itself. She writes, the Odyssey is all about travel and all about poetry, and the metaphorical association of sailing and song helps elaborate the mutual implications of these two thematic aspects of the poem. But much more important, she continues, it helps structure the ethnographic imagination of the poem. The world of the Odyssey is, after all, a world of amazing new developments in matters of trade and commerce. It's also a time of increased overseas travel and exploration, and the poem's fascination with ships and sailing is linked to this brave new world as much as it reflects new methods of poetic construction. This is where I part company with Doherty. Sea travel certainly figures the broad international currency of the renown embodied in poetry itself. It's supposed to travel around this poem. But sea travel also has a dark, oppressive aspect, the irresistible force of the natural order confronting human beings, and the barren absence of the civilized structures that are to be found on land. Indeed, the Odyssey wrote the rule book for world literature's chronotopic conception of blue water as, I'm quoting, the realm of the open ocean containing immense and violent powers of weather, terrain, currents, tide, water depth, monstrous animals and aggressive warriors, pirates and adventurers, seeking gain in unpoliced zones beyond the control of sovereign and law. That's a poem from the collection on the novel, the big collection by the names escape me, Moretti, of course, yeah. For Odysseus, however, the sea represents more than disorder and threat to his person. It represents the very abnegation of identity, the dissolution into anonymity of the renown he'd won at Troy. To be imprisoned on Calypso's island, of course Calypso the concealer of Ogygia, distant even for the gods, is tantamount to non-existence. So the colonial narrative is therefore relegated to the margins of the story. When Euryalus calls him a trader, Odysseus, rather than embracing this identity, as Doherty's model would suggest, he objects violently and instead proves his heroic mettle with a sporting display. Odysseus, although he notes the colonisability of Goat Island, doesn't colonise it. Odysseus the trader is rather a shadowy allomorph of his heroic counterpart, the inhabitant of a world that, while plausible on its own terms, is not the one of the poem. We catch glimpses of this other Odysseus in the so-called Cretan lies that he tells various people in books 13 to 19. In these, he's always the son of a nobleman, but a debased one, who travels and trades abroad and gets mixed up with foreign peoples. We're told on one occasion, passage 5 on your handout, that he's the illegitimate child of a bought concubine, in contrast to the upright born Ithagenes children. And we might here think of the upright symbols that dominate Odysseus' own homescape, particularly the bed stick. This alternative Odysseus loses his wealth and is forced back on his wits. That he lives on Crete, an important trading island in the Archaic period, is itself telling, as are his sojourns in the multicultural contact zones of Egypt and Cyprus. This figure befriends Phoenician merchants, both honourable and manipulative, and enriches himself from his travels, albeit by the traditionally heroic means of acquiring guest gifts. Neo-analysts have long speculated that the Cretan tales allude to a pre-Homeric tradition about Odysseus, but that assessment, right or wrong, doesn't explain their function within the Odyssey as we have it. The Cretan lies are, I would argue, intrinsic to the poem's tone and design, offering flashes of a repressed counter-narrative rooted in the trader's self-reliance and bricolage rather than the warrior hero's intellect and vigour. This alternative Odyssey is visible, however, only in palimpsest, but it is this story that has the cultural and emotional attraction for listeners in the archaic Mediterranean, newly expanded for the Greeks. This is the Odysseus, indeed, that our hero could have been, his long-lost twin brother, who finds his meaning in the aleatory patterns of the sea and his identity in the modes of hybridization with non-Greek peoples. But in the epic imaginary, he's marginalized, bastardized, debased in favour of the upright born, the Bronze Age hero, bent on re-establishing his own uprightness in the household. Archaeologists and historians of archaic Greece often present it as a world of hybridity and flux, powered by newly enriched transmarine networks. Work on sites such as Lefkandi, Almina and Pithecusae have opened up new vistas onto the multiple interaction zones of this era, pointing not just to long-distance exchanges of goods, but also small-scale lendings of people. Such work has, of course, been inspired in part by post-colonial ideas of identity which have shifted us away from a homeostatic, rooted model towards more fluid, marine, interstitial, dynamic paradigm. But the canonical epics seem to tense against this model. Sea travel is routinely presented as dangerous, undesirable, and ideologically suspect. In Hesiod's Works and Days, the easy life is imagined, passage 6, as hanging up your rudder, a phrase to which we'll return. The just, we're told, this is the second passage on number 6, do not travel on ships, for the grain-giving earth bears them fruit. The earth is enough for them, they don't need to go abroad. In a famous passage known to scholars as the Nautilia, of sailing, the narrator addresses this theme directly. This is passage 7 on your handout. This long and complex episode has a number of sequences. The first, lines 618 to 29, is introduced by the line, if desire, chimeros, for storm-tossed seafaring takes you. This is a paradox, of course. Desire for something storm-tossed, something dangerous, something alien, is no desire at all. It suggests a wild, quasi-erotic infatuation that destabilizes the normal rational faculties. The poet opens his account of marine activity with the elemental destructiveness unleashed at the time when, I'm quoting, the Pleiades flee mighty strength of Orion, Sthenos Oprimon, and the gusts of all kinds of winds, anemone, seethe through Eucene. That's to say around this time of year, around October, November. Winds are of course associated with unpredictability, with narrativity, with adventure, all that Hesiodic poetics, with their commitment to regular cycles of agricultural order, oppose. The adjective mighty, or brimos, is associated elsewhere in the poem with a violent bronze race in the myth of the 5 races, and in the theophany with other forms of monstrosity. Indeed, sea travel at the setting of the Pleiades seems to be implicitly aligned with the terrible destruction wrought in the theophany upon Typhoeus, when Zeus unleashed mighty, Obrimon, thunderbolts against him, which churned up land, heaven and sea, and unleashed winds, anemone, and the waves seethed, thuia. This opposition between order and disorder, between the regular cycles of agriculture and the monstrous unpredictability of the sea, resonates against the advice to stow one's ship in orderly fashion, New Cosmos in line 628. This order-disorder polarity is also tied to a self-reflexive association between Hesiodic poetry and agriculture and the soil. At this time, Hesiod's narrator tells us, line 623, we should be mindful to work the land, as I bid you. In the episode's next phase, the poet, perhaps surprisingly, turns to a time when it is seasonable to sail, Orion, plot on. Now drag your ship, he says, swift ship, to the sea and fit it with proper cargo, photon, so that you may bring profit, Kurnos, home. After the disparaging signals given in the previous sections, perhaps initially arresting to read this positive description of sea trade. But any inkling that readers or audience might have that such ambivalence is immediately justified. But now we read that such a life is chosen only out of necessity. Just as my father and yours, Perseus, you great fool, used to sail in boats, deprived as he was of a fine means of life, Estlu. Once he came here too, after he crossed it over a big sea, leaving behind Aeolian Kyme in a black boat, fleeing not wealth, nor riches, nor prosperity, but evil poverty, which Zeus gives to men. And he settled in Massatop, near Helicon, in a wretched village, Aspra, evil in winter, distressful in summer, nor ever fine, Estelaire again, at no time. So the mercantile life is construed in terms not of wealth creation in a positive sense, but of escape from grinding need. There's a moral dimension here too. The decent livelihood, the esthlos livelihood, which the father is wanting, suggests ethical as well as economic impoverishment. Nor is the father's need even met by his mercantile quest. If an esthlos life, a noble, positive life, is what he was in search of, then Aspra, which is esthlos at no time, the poet says, will not provide it. In other words, although the second phase of the Nautilia might seem initially to offer some positive justification for seafaring, that justification is swiftly abrogated. The Works and Days defines its landedness by repeatedly alluding to the poem that it's not, which is to say an expansive, transmarine epic full of narrative and cultural change. The poetry that's being palimpsestically erased here is no doubt Homeric, or at least Homeric in spirit. But the Iliad and the Odyssey are the great poems of overseas travel and of close engagement with foreign peoples. Numerous scholars have seen the Nautilia as playing an ingenious four-da game with epic poetics, particularly in the final section where the Hesiodic narrator offers an account of the seafaring life of which he has no experience. Passage number 9 on the handout. If you turn your foolish spirit to commerce and decide to flee debts and joyless hunger, I shall show you the measures of the much roaring sea. I, who have no expertise at all in either seafaring or boat. For never yet did I sail broad sea in a boat, except to Euboea from Aulis, where once the Achaeans, waiting through winter, gathered together a great host to sail from holy Greece to Troy with its beautiful women. Euboea is famously where he claims to have competed in the poetry competition at the Games of Amphidamas, which he won, an episode that inspired the well-known contest of Homer and Hesiod. So Hesiod's one overseas journey was from the Greek mainland to Euboea, across the Euripus. In fact, at its narrowest points. Martin West, who claimed to have swum it, said that it's 65 metres wide at that point. It's probably the shortest marine trip that one can take in the Greek world. And of course, it's designed specifically to communicate that point, to contrast powerfully and deliberately with a huge Pan-Hellenic expedition against Troy across the wide sea. In a manner that might strike us as proto-Hellenicean, the poet contrasts his own small-scale poem voyage with the oceanic sublimity of Homer. And indeed, while Hesiod sets himself against the heroic epic tradition by contrasting their respective sea voyages, the fundamental point is that land is best. What lies behind this anxiety about the sea? Is it anything more than a fear of the unstable elemental wrecking plane? The answer is surely yes. Archaic epic shows a recurrent anxiety, most of all, about intermarriage between Greeks and non-Greeks. This is highly likely to have been a concern in the real world. John Coldstream argued that goods of mixed origins found in graves at Kyme, not the Kyme that Hesiod refers to, the Italian one, pointed to intermarriage between Greeks, Etruscans and others. And while Gillian Shepherd has rightly pointed out that this is not the only construction that can be based on the evidence, the scenario seems highly likely. People do intermarry in colonial situations. In 1824, I discovered today, for example, the US Congress debated a bill making financial provision to support mixed white and Indian families, but it wasn't passed. Homeric epic doesn't frame the issue exactly as one of ethnic miscegenation. Homeric poetry is usually thought to be pre-ethnic, or at least proto-ethnic. As has been noted long, And indeed, since Thucydides, the Greeks of the Iliad, in inverted commas, are not Greeks. They're referred to variously as Argives, Achaeans, and Danaans. They're not Hellenes. Hellas in Homer means the northern section of Greece, not the whole. Moreover, Paris' transgression, when he escapes with Helen, is presented not as an intermarriage with another ethnic group, but in terms of a property dispute between aristocratic males. Paris has broken the rules of hospitality and stolen Menelaus' property. Hence, it is Zeus Xenios, Zeus of guests and hosts, that Menelaus invokes when he brings down his wrath upon the Trojans for, I'm quoting, taking my wife and my many possessions. When in Book 3 of the Iliad, Agamemnon demands restitution, he wants the return of Helen and her possessions, together with an additional recompense, timere. Now, this classification of adultery as a property dispute seems also to be rooted in law, or whatever we want to call the judicial custom that seems to operate in Homer's time. There is, of course, no codified legalism. The standard designation for adultery, moicheia, puts in but one appearance in Homer. And here again, we see the same kind of patterns to do with male transactions and to do with property. In the Odyssey's celebrated song of Ares and Aphrodite, it's said that Ares, the aggressor caught in the act, owes moichagria to Hephaestus, the aggrieved husband. The phrase apparently means a penalty for being caught in the act of moicheia, and presumably refers to a compensation equivalent to the bride price that her husband originally disbursed to get his wife. The effect of this is to present adultery as a wrong done by one male to another, a wrong that can be righted by financial recompense. It's not, as Christian-influenced interpreters sometimes assume, a primarily moral crime. Nor, more importantly for our purposes, was it a question of the pollution of bloodlines, as, for example, it so conspicuously is in classical Athens. And yet, there is still clearly considerable ideological anxiety in this area. Helen and Paris, let's think about on this for a second. Helen and Paris are having sex, but no children issue. None in Homer, at any rate. There's a possibility of one son called Agavos in the Cupria. Adulterous liaisons in Homer don't seem to produce children. There are certainly nothoi, bastards in the Iliad, usually bit partners, Tuco is the exception, but they seem to be the offspring not of adultery, but of legitimate concubinage. Similarly, the Odyssey raises the spectre of foreign intermarriage by having Odysseus sleep with Calypso and Circe. Yet despite, again, years of cohabitation, there's not a hint of pregnancy. Again, in Homer, the epic cycle has, in the case of the telegony, the offspring of Odysseus and Circe. Themes of intermarriage and hybridization, as their troubling consequences are studiously avoided. The whole point of constructing adultery, as the Homeric poems do, as a wrong that is rectifiable through transaction between males, seems to be to deproblematize the consequences of adultery, to take adultery out of the awkward areas it could inhabit if we were to think of marriage between Greeks and non-Greeks. Even so, the Homeric poems do, I want to argue, worry about sexual hybridization. They do have a discourse for expressing this anxiety. They have a resonant phrase for it, a phrase that is so familiar to us now that we tend to miss its real force. This phrase is to mingle in love, en philoterte migenoi, which is far more than a simple euphemism. The language of mixing in Greek has powerful symbolic resonance, almost always implying the combination of heterogeneous elements. Mixing can be positive and constructive. Say, for example, in later Greek medicine, the healthy human body is imagined as a proportionate mixture of humours. And of course, the civilized symposium requires water and wine to be mixed in suitable proportion. But mixture can also be coded negatively, implying the adulteration of that which should be pure. This seems to be the dominant association of the Homeric and Hesiodic phrase mingling in love, which is almost always used in connection with improper union. So let's look at one of the passages under number 11 on your handouts. The phrase is found, for example, of the liaison that produced the Scotios bastard Bucolion. It's used of the adulterous sex craved by Proetus' wife Antaeus, Lenobia in the later tradition. And it's used of the illicit love of Ares and Aphrodite. Particularly striking is Penelope's description of Helen as one who mingled in love and in bed with a man from another country, Andri Allodapod. The mixing here involves more than adultery. It's Paris's foreignness, the fact that he comes from elsewhere, that renders him heterogeneous, renders him the alien element in the mix. In Hesiod's theogony, sexual mingling produces new beings. Echidna, half girl and half snake, mingles in love, passage 12, with Typhon, producing a number of monstrosities, including Cerberus, Hydra, and Chimera. Keto and Phorcys mingle to produce a terrible snake, line 334, it's not new handout. But we can note also the monstrous children of Pontos, sea, and earth, mixing together, Misgomenos, and Chrysaor, mixing with the Oceanid Callirrhoe to produce three-headed Geryon in Neus. This is passage 13 on your handout. Chrysaor, mingling in love with Callirrhoe, glorious Ocean's daughter, begot three-headed Geryoneus, who was slain by Heracles' force beside his rolling-footed cattle in Siga Erythea, on the day when he drove the broad-bowed cattle to holy Tiryns, after he crossed over the ocean, straight of the ocean, and killed Orthus and the cowherd Eurytion in the murky stable beyond the glorious ocean. Less conspicuously monstrous, but still in the realm of the weird, the mingling union of night and Erebos produces ether and day, and Eurybier mingles with the minor Titan Creus and conceives the otherwise unknown Astraeus, Pallas, and Perseus. Thus, although love mingling certainly became in time a relatively unmarked formulaic term in later catalogue poetry, for example, the Hesiodic catalogue of women, it seems to be used simply for sex in all its varieties. For Homer and Hesiod, it always seems to have connoted a dangerous union that threatens to, and in Hesiod actually does, generate monstrous hybrid offspring. Now let's consider these Hesiodic hybrids in more depth. As criticism has long acknowledged, the theogony is a narrative in form only. Functionally, it's a description and legitimization of a particular ontological and political order. Politically, the poem demonstrates the dependence of order and peace on the institution of kingship. And the prologue, with its praise of basileus, of kings, affiliates Zeus's kingship to the mortal counterpart. Ontologically, it defines not just the separate realms in the cosmos of sky, earth, sea, and underworld, but also the distinct orders of divine, human, and animal. The irrevocable dominance of the Olympian order is given further narrative expression in the form of Zeus's suppression of a number of monstrous beings that are inimical to cosmic order, in terms either of their rebellious action or in terms of the lack of ontological fit into the phylogenetic, divine, human, and animal scheme. As Jenny Strauss-Clay notes, the overriding characteristic of all these monstrosities is precisely their hybrid character. That's what a monster is in Homer and Hesiod. In itself, this is no surprise, since, of course, any fleeting familiarity with ancient visual culture will disclose the centrality of such a niche formen to the imaginary of the Mediterranean and indeed the entire West Asian world. But Hesiod's hybrids aren't static visual ciphers of uncanny power. They're embodied in narratives of begetting, of coming to pass, and of suppression. These mini-biographies, moreover, are embedded in a larger genealogical structure that sutures the creation of the cosmos to the heroic age. This very narrative structure lays heavy emphasis on the acts of coupling and procreation, and on the legitimacy of the parental dyad. The success or failure in the theogonic crucible comes down to genetics as well as ethics. When Echidna mingles in love with Typhon, the reference is not just to bodily copulation, but also to the problematic hybridization of species, producing phenomena that demand either suppression or marginalization in liminal space. Now, there are strong hints, I think, that Hesiodic poetry associates these monstrous hybrids with colonial intermarriage. Two indicators in the first catalogue of monsters at 270 to 325 point us in this direction. The first is, once again, the connection with the sea, all of these monsters are descendants of Phorcys and Keto, sibling offspring of the mixing of sea and earth. And they're all definitively marine deities. Phorcys being the old man of the sea, and Keto's name deriving from a word for sea monster or whale, Kertos. The second reason for reading these monstrous hybrids as allegories of intercultural hybridization is geographic. Where location is mentioned, it's almost always in the distant ocean. We should note especially, this is the second passage in the 913, the Gorgons, who live across the famous ocean near the edge of night, where are the sweet-voiced Hesperides. Chrysaor too, this is back to the first passage in the 13, is born by the streams of ocean, and fathers on Callirrhoe, daughter of Ocean, Gerioneus, another figure firmly localized in the far west, across the famous ocean. It's 294. They also produce a terrible snake who guards the golden apple at the edge of the world. It looks very much then as though the inception of monstrous hybridity has been closely associated with sea travel in the western Mediterranean, an association that would have resonated powerfully at a time of westward colonial expansion. Hybridity is almost always problematic in Homer's Hesiod. Why is this? Because I would argue it was going on at the time, because the colonial encounter with other peoples was the making of the Greek world, not just in terms of the wealth generated by international commerce, but also because a new sense of self was being forged at this time in counterpoint, what I should call a peninsular identity, which manifested itself partly by embedding a sense of natural, intrinsic connection to the Greek land, a sense of racination, and partly by resisting the call of the sea and the attractions of settling abroad. The Iliad, after all, if you think about it, is a profoundly odd text. It's essentially about an expedition to the Anatolian coast, in which the whole aim is simply to recover Helen and go home as if nothing had ever happened, to restore the natural homeostatic state of the Greek world. There's no thought expressed of settling or creating any kind of dynastic links with the cities then, even though, of course, the Anatolian coast was precisely where the Greeks had settled in the greatest numbers. In the mythical imaginary of archaic Greece, as opposed to the reality, there was an invisible elastic cord pulling every traveller back to the mainland. In the Odyssey, meanwhile, we have hints, of course, of this alternative Odysseus, a traveller, a settler, hybridizer even, whom we can glimpse in the poem's penumbra. Sometimes even Odysseus himself inhabits this colonial persona. But in the final analysis, the teleological superego is far too strong. Tony Tanner's classic book on modern bourgeois fiction, Adultery in the Novel, takes adultery as the foundational trope of novelistic writing. Novel, in its origin, he might almost be said to be a transgressive mode, inasmuch as it seemed to break or mix or adulterate the existing genre expectations of the time. Archaic epic, I would submit, is precisely the opposite. Its claims to be the founding genre of Greek literature are based on the resistance to hybridity and adulteration. Let's think too about the roads that Greek culture could have taken but didn't take. It was not an inevitability that the Iliad and the Odyssey would become the canonical vehicles for the Greeks' sense of self. Epics of intermarriage were perfectly possible. In Virgil's Aeneid, for example, the foundation of Rome depends on Aeneas' marriage to the native Italian Lavinia. This is a founding myth that depends on an idea not of exclusivity, but of territorial acquisition, because of course Lavinia betokens Latium, the home of the Latins. Closer to Homer's own time, the Argonautic story revolves centrally around a narrative of intermarriage. Circe's description in the Odyssey of the Argo as universally famous Parsi Melusa is conventionally taken as a sign that the poet knew and expected his audience to know an Argonautic epic of some form. That Circe advises Odysseus to avoid the Argonautic clashing rocks and sail via Scylla and Charybdis implies that, I'm quoting here from Martin West, the Odyssey poet knew the story of the Argonauts' voyage and had it in mind as some sort of analogue or foil for Odysseus' peregrinations. And although there was certainly a Corinthocentric tradition that avoided the implication of intermarriage by making Aeetes, and hence Medea, originally Corinthian, the Argonautica known to the Odyssey poet must have located Aeetes in a distant land, since the sailors passed through the clashing rocks, I'm quoting, on the way back from Aeetes. The pre-Homeric Argonautica was presumably at some level a metastatized allegory of trade rather than of colonization. Hence, rather than settling, putting down roots, as Aeneas does, and possessing the land stroke woman, Jason took Medea and the fleece, metonyms for valued goods, and took them home with him from foreign shores. There existed then the possibility that the founding narrative of Greek literature might have been a myth of commerce and intermarriage, but for reasons to which we'll now turn, a myth of war and endogamy was preferred. The archaic diaspora lived forward by the sea, exploring new spaces and connecting with new peoples. But although this expansive new world is evoked by the Odyssey, that poem's mapping of the Mediterranean is overlain with a fierce resistance to the sea and diasporic identity that it embodies, a powerful yearning for home and an unquestioned ideology of the land. Ithaca may be sea-girt, one of its epithets, but it's also rocky, rugged, and the only adjective Odysseus ever uses of it, shady, covered in trees. Its crenellated terrain is no good for horses, but it does nourish goats. The Iliadic Achilles too feels the call of home, even if he doesn't possibly act on it. He feels the call for deep soil of Thea, the nurse of men, Erybolas. These epithets and descriptions are not merely formulaic, they tell of the intrinsic qualities of the land, its toughness, its fecundity, its depth. For all that Odysseus' epic renown is shared, is intrinsically linked to his sea travel, and he derives the pluralistic epithets from its openness and its unpredictability, polytropia. His own desire, the poem's narrative vector, is for a return to the land and to his family, the two being associatively interwoven. When he recognises Ithaca for the first time, he bends to kiss the brain-giving earth, the Arura. Arura is strictly arable land, and as Pierre Viganake memorably noted, cultivated land is primarily a marker of civilization in the Odyssey. But there's more going on here than the negotiation of that classic structuralist dyad, the natural and the cultural. Odysseus greets the fertile beneficence of the soil, as one would a family member. Human identity, sociality, and warmth is rooted in the land that sustains it. And that, I think, is what ultimately is the meaning of Odysseus planting his oar in the ground, the life-giving ground in Tiresias' story. And that was the meaning of that final, powerful gesture that would have accompanied it in rhapsodic performance. The rhapsodic skeptron finds its roots. Thank you.
I was wondering, to the point that you mentioned about there being a certain resistance to diasporic kind of feeling and kind of always kind of a yearning to go back and the tensions that appear. I was wondering if those very tensions cannot be also turned around as a kind of stabilizing force, precisely because they can offer that when faced with various tensions. And I guess one example would be someone like the figure of Achilles himself, who is a kind of a strange mixture, yet at the same time his very kind of birth also has a stabilizing force, because it doesn't create other troubles, yet his birth creates. So I'm wondering if there is a much kind of more ingrained duality there, that everything is on the one hand resistant and at the same time also stabilizing in many of these kind of units.
So you're seeing Achilles as, stabilizing in what way?
Well, I mean, because he averts the war of the gods, right? Zeus wants to get with Thetis, but he resists. He resists to that because there's that prophecy that the son will be better than the father.
Right.
And so he pushes Thetis down on the world. Right. I mean, is that what you?
Yeah, exactly. And of course that creates other problems and yet solves other problems.
Yes.
And also, I guess also the ambiguity between home and not home. I mean, Achilles himself with Patroclus, where are the soldiers buried,
Right.
Or something like that. That there is a resistance, and yet there is a kind of acceptance or stabilizing balance that always somehow happens within these kind of units.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the story of the Iliad is more complex. The question of what home actually is for these warriors is a very open one, and in a sense, the camp looks like a kind of proto-colonial space. They've constructed house-like buildings there, and they've got wife-like beings there as well, and everything seems to be a sort of both a kind of obverse of what's going on in Troy, but also an obverse of the life that they're used to. So there's a way in which, and I think you're right, there's a way in which the Iliad does play this in a slightly more complex way. And I think that's, again, it's just as in the Odyssey, you get these sort of penumbral visions of Odysseus the trader. I think in the Iliad, you get the sort of sense that this could be about colonization, it could be about putting down roots here. And of course, we never see them go, and the poem itself is centrally about what it's like to live on the shore of a foreign land and to put down roots there. So yeah, I think it's a more complex picture than I was, as far as the Iliad goes, than I was saying.
Thanks. I'm just curious what you might say about the kind of relationship between the sort of thematics of mixing, as a kind of rejected form of life, and the poetics of them insofar as they sort of centre around the idea of poikilia, which is it's a kind of union together of what is inherently disparate, right? So because it's not, as you know, it's not until much later that one gets a kind of poetics of Genesis. So I'm just curious what you
you say it's not till later that you get a poetics of organicism, but it's also not till later that you get a poetics of poikilia as well. I mean, specifically, that poikilia is the Nonian word par excellence. So you have to, but what I would say,
it's already there, and you can already see it, at the level of kind of the artifacts within the poems, right? So right?
within
you can always see it within both the Iliad, especially in the Iliad, within the kind of staging of artifacts, right? Poikilia is a kind of value.
Well, I think certainly later critics of the Iliad and Odyssey diagnose it in terms of attention between sort of organic unity and parts. And when the Odyssey in particular is seen Aristotle as the exotic poem par excellence, and it has that sort of that poly thing going on all the way from the very start. The anthropoletron of the opening lines is actually a sort of a cipher for the many-sidedness of the poem itself, which is obviously generated in part by the narrative chronology, the fracturing of narrative chronology. So I think there is a sort of intrinsic plurality that the Odyssey embraces. With the Iliad, and I've got an explanation for that. But the Iliad, it seems to me that to say that there's aesthetics of poikilia going on in Iliad seems to me to sort of it certainly go against the way which ancient critics would. They want us to read it in a very unified way.
Well, what about the shield? What about the sort of celebration of the bringing together of diverse materials in the shield?
Yeah.
Isn't that? You could say that's to project onto a visual artifact, and therefore it's not. I'm just curious.
Well, it's projected onto a visual artifact. Again, the ancient critics would say as a way of creating a synoptic unity out of the diversity of the world. And what is unity but the synthesizing of diverse things? The Odyssey, you might say, has that sort of fractured diversity as a sort of driving aesthetic. It's got the idea that you can go to one place. It's got this sort of archipelago-like structure that suggests a sort of fracturing of episodic units, whereas the Iliad, if the shield is embodying the essence of the poem as a whole, the shield seems to bring all this stuff together, and say it all fits together in a single comprehensive vision. That's what the ancient critics said of it. But I'm not. That's all my way. It's a kitchen's way of answering your question, really, which is that I think the answer here is something to do with narrativity, because narrativity essentially depends on breaking the well-wrought urn, because you can't have a stable, single thing and narrativity as well. You've got to have some sort of sense of energy. So the question is, what I've been emphasising in the course of this lecture, and it'll be different next week, but what I'm emphasising this one is the overall sort of shape of the narrative structure as a whole. So, the classic liminal plot goes, you have a stable situation, you break it, everything gets a bit chaotic and mad, and then you put it back together at the end. And the Odyssey certainly is a version of that kind of plot, which is the complex pluralistic narrativity that drives it in the middle exists in order to be mended in resolution. And again, I'm not saying that's the whole of the story, the final journey does complicate that a little bit, but that's how I read the Odyssey.
John?
Thanks, Tim. You've given us a lot to think about, I'm sure. But I wondered, towards the end, when you started using the terminology of diasporas, I wonder if that can be a little misleading.
Right.
Because, you pointed out that Homer doesn't use the word Hellenes to describe the Greeks. And this doesn't seem to be a deliberate archaism. Nobody else before the early 6th century uses the word Hellenes. So we're talking about a movement of people who may speak versions of the same language but aren't calling themselves the same thing, which I think is central to the diaspora. Secondly, a diaspora operates on a sort of conceptual, at any rate, notion of core and periphery. And I'm not sure that maps so well onto the Greek Mediterranean. I take your point about these sort of weird unions happening on the edges of the ocean and all that sort of thing. But I don't know that you can actually then map that on geographically and say, well, the core is the Greek mainland and Sicily is the periphery. Now, to someone like, landlubber like Hesiod, Ithaca probably seems just as far away as Methuselah. And the third thing, which you did mention, was the sort of the desire to return, which is very often expressed, if not often realised, in diaspora communities. But I don't know, perhaps you do, but I don't know of any examples that come to mind right now of someone out in Sicily or Italy saying, God, I really wish I'd go back to Achaia or something.
Going back to Achaia?
Achaia.
Right.
Or wherever.
Well, I don't
somewhere in the mainland.
I don't know where one would look for evidence of that kind of thing.
No, exactly. I don't know how. I don't see any desire to return. I guess you're saying that doesn't mean there wasn't, but.
Well, what I'm not saying is that the poem reflects in a direct mimetic way the experiences of colonists, that they're also sitting in their colonies saying, we go home, money, just run home. What I'm saying is that when Greek culture adopted these poems and put them in the very heart of their national project, and we know, for example, that Panathenaea, for example, the poems the Iliad was performed. We don't know as much as we'd like to about the other performance, but they're clearly, culturally central from, let's say the 6th century onwards. So what is going on there is not necessarily creating a vision of identity that is amenable to colonists. It's presenting a vision of identity to people on the mainland who are being encouraged to think of the mainland as a place where they should be. So it seems to me that you've got sort of different forces tensing against each other. You've got the economic and commercial imperative that is pushing people outwards across the Mediterranean, and at the same time you've got the countervailing force which is trying to create a pull to the mainland.
That's the bit I don't really see.
Okay.
Don't you have Archilochus who goes from Paros to Thrace for a colonizing trip and regrets it and mixes
He doesn't have much nice to say about Thessos, but does he actually say, I wish I could go back to Paros?
Isn't that implied when you say I
Why?
look at him in a lousy place now?
Why? You can end up in a dump and say, well, it's still better than the place I live.
Right, that's not supposed to be what he said.
Can I just also on this question of they're not called Greeks. Yeah, they're not called Greeks, but they are. It seems to me there's a sort of nominalist fallacy going on sometimes when people talk about the Iliad in particular, because they are identified as a separate group to the Trojan. There's a very strong sense, and war is a very polarizing kind of trope, if you like, there's a very strong sense that there's our group here and there's the Trojans over there, and there are names that we use for our group. We call them Achaeans and Argos and Danans. Now, these words may not be the same word as the word that later Greeks referred to, but it seems to refer to something that they all have in common. It's not like the Trojans and their allies, their Lycians and so forth, or with people from diverse polis. These people are a group who are united by something. And also, as far as the landmass goes, yes, it's true that the entire peninsula is not called Hellas, but it's the northern part that seems to be called Hellas, and the southern part which seems to be called Argos. And you can refer to the entire peninsula very comfortably, and people do it on numerous occasions.
Only in the Odyssey. In the Iliad, Hellas only refers to the...
Right, okay. But in the Odyssey, certainly, yes, this sort of idea of sort of Anna, Hellas, Takai, Argos, or whatever it is, throughout, that does refer to the peninsula. So you do have a sense of the peninsula as a territorial unity.
Yes, I'm interested in this duality you brought up between the late Bronze Age, like heroic journey, and then the archaic international trade part, and your rejection for the pre-Homeric reading of that, because the late Bronze Age is full of international trade and it's quite dynamic. I mean, you find amphorae in Asia Minor, Levant, Cyprus, all over, and it seems like it's just as rigorous and dynamic of trade networks going on in the late Bronze Age, and there's a lot of new research that it happened also in the Iron Age, and there's just not as much written about it. And so I'm wondering about this tension. You're reading it, it seems, between the late Bronze Age and the archaic, but could that tension just be part of the original poem if it is late Bronze Age? That tension was a huge part of the late Bronze Age identity of the Greek. Like, you also have the home and the sea at the same time, and that's within the culture of the late Bronze Age as well. So I was wondering if you had thought about these tensions between the late Bronze Age as well.
Okay, so when I said the late Bronze Age, what I meant was the late Bronze Age as it's understood from the position implied by the poem itself. That's to say, the heroic world described in these poems is not a sort of archaeologically or historically accurate portrait of the Bronze Age. And as I was putting it, which is I'm sure in rather too simplistic terms, as I was putting it, you can think of it in terms of two levels. One is a sort of hazy, fictitious projection of a heroic past, in which people don't besmirch them. Aristocrats don't go around doing terribly schmucky things like trading with people, and glimpses of the contemporary reality. And what you're saying is not only, I guess, that you're not only asking the question of how accurate a picture of the late Bronze Age is, but you're also saying that actually that contrast could have been, could be a late Bronze Age mentality that is being. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I think the dominant, Jonathan may correct me, but I think the dominant model for understanding what the Homeric poems are up to now is thinking of them as kind of ideologically centrally about the period in which they're sort of embedded, the archaic period. And they do have all sorts of relics of earlier periods, including amazingly old epithet structures and formulaic structures. You can go back to the show points of contact with Sanskrit and so forth. So they clearly have lots of old stuff in them, but their sort of worldview is formed of a kind of combination of the archaic worldview and a sort of mythicized sort of fantasy, sort of King Arthur-y kind of legend structure.
But see that also the culture, you can read it just as heroic, but any culture that can just bring up that many ships and build that many ships so quickly already has a huge shipbuilding structure. If it was just like a palatial community that just sat in its palace, they wouldn't have that kind of shipbuilding network. To build a ship, you have to have an international trade already.
Right.
Cyprus or Lebanon or something to get those kinds of actual ships to go to war in that kind of. So even though it's not talked about, it's still there. That there's a lot of trade networks going on.
Yes, that's interesting. And again, it would be great to have an early Argonautica, because of course some versions of the Argonautica say that the Argonautica is an etiology for the invention of shipbuilding. It'd be really interesting to see how that would play out in play, to see if that was actually seen as something that in the heroic age there was a time before shipbuilding, and then shipbuilding came along, and what difference that made.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I would just like to get back more to the theme of mingling and I thought that was a really interesting point you made about how it's more used for illicit relationships. I've never thought of that before. So I guess I had a couple questions on that, and one of them was I was wondering if you know like what the vocabulary used in the scene where Paris is seducing Zeus in the Iliad. So I'd be really interested, like, how is that portrayed? Like, is that because they're married, but it's still like a seduction scene, so it's almost illicit, but it's technically illicit. And then what? That's what I thought it was, but I haven't actually read it in Greek. So
There's Odysseus and Penelope.
and then I was wondering about that too. And then the other thing I was wondering was that it's just that you see in I think Hesiod and Homer much more frequently depicted scenes where it's an adulterous or illicit relationship. And there are just like I can't really think of that many actually like illicit like lovemaking scenes.
Licit.
Yeah. So I'm like, is it just that we don't like talk about like married people having sex? Or is it that this term actually is like more geared towards like illicit?
Yeah, no,
Anyway,
I mean,
I'm just like
the second point is absolutely right, that I mean, again, in the sense it comes back to narrativity, that two married people having sex is not a narrative. You need to have something more than that. But I'm sorry, I have gone through all the mingling passages, but not in the last week, and I can't remember. You might be right about Zeus and Hera. I've got a feeling that did figure out. And Penelope and Odysseus, I don't think they mingled, do
They
they?
don't mingle when they after
I almost thought it was mingling in relevant conversations. Like the maybe, like I can't remember. It's been
They
a while,
certainly-
but I remember it being a very interesting phrase that sort of like shows
They share stories, yeah.
So they definitely do it. I'm not sure. Is there like another term? What's the norm?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they are. I can't remember, but I don't know that they do actually. It is said, well, yeah. But they certainly share stories. That's the primary thing. Yeah.
Nick, did you?
Yep. Thank you. I have a question about handout passage number 7, please. So it's this bit in the middle, starting around line 624. We're touching about like the maintenance of the ship. The carrier's supposed to beach it and then surround it with rocks so it doesn't get moist and drain out the holes so there's any water in it, and then take the gear and pack it away and fold the sail very carefully. I was wondering how you read that passage. I mean, is that just sort of like an indication of how resolutely he's advising you to turn away from sailing during the winter period, or is there a possibility there that that's sort of like an acknowledgement of the investment that the ship and its equipment was, and how it's like almost an indication that it's like an aggregation of capital there?
He's very ambivalent on ships because, I mean, he's clearly conceding that there are occasions when you need a ship, and a ship is, as you say, it's a very valuable thing. It's something that needs to be looked after and needs to be stewarded in the same way that the implements and the land need to be very carefully shepherded. So yes, it's a resource, and in a subsistence economy that he's described, we need to be extremely careful with it. So I don't think there's anything more. I mean, I wouldn't see there's anything more going on here than Hesiod in his, didactic way, telling you how to be careful with something that is valuable. But it does point to this rather fissured approach that he has to shipping in general, which is on one hand saying, don't do it, it's really terrible, But if you've got to do it this way, and then you can make some profit. But even so, it's really terrible. So it's just there is a sort of schizophrenia about this. feeding the ships. But I think it's a really interesting passage actually in terms of the, as you say, the sort of the very careful, deliberate, and almost loving maintenance of this thing that he seems to decry.
Thank you. Yeah, this is really interesting. Are there, I guess, instead of a methodology, is it relevant instances relevant where procreation happens without him? You know, like, I mean, the Athenians, for instance, would really, really like your thesis, right? Erechtheus is generated from, Athena wiping the rapist seed off of her thumb?
Yeah.
And the Athenians themselves are autophonic. I mean, to some extent, this is an ideology that they really appreciate.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the standard version of things would go something like the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Hesiodic poems represent something kind of pre-ethnic. You know, the Greeks haven't really they're sort of on their way to working out what it is to be pan-leading and so forth, but they haven't really got there yet. And as a result, they don't really have a strong sense of what kind of binds people together. With the catalogue of women, of course, you've got this sort of the Jonathan Locke work, but you've got this sort of the idea of kind of common ethnos, which is bound together, and like so many, like same in early Islamic culture, same in early Israelite culture, what you do to create the idea of kind of the unity of the people is you extend the kinship structure. So let's say we're ultimately all a big family. People have traditionally said that was not there in the Iliad, the Odyssey, and Hesiod, except insofar as the end of the theogony has some sort of catalogic structures in it. And what I'm trying to do is, in a way, say that it's not there until you see it, and if you see it, you see what it's trying not to be, and what modes of identity it's resisting. So really, I suppose the thesis of the argument is that not only what you're saying, that the Homeric poems are always already classical, but in a way they're always already Hellenistic, in the sense that the idea of mixing and fluidity and sort of the crossing of genres and so forth, all this stuff is always already part of the Greek world. It's just that there's some forces in the Greek world that seek to resist it. So epic's job is to resist the natural kind of unnatural, but it's sort of the sort of the innate kind of tendency of a hybridizing sort of fluent pan-Mediterranean culture to sort of dissipate itself into mix and so forth. And what the epics are trying to do is precisely to resist that. So yeah, as I say, the larger project really is all about trying to get away from the idea of Homeric and Hesiodic poems being somehow a kind of a pure point of origin of the Greek culture, after which everything gets more messy and confused in the culture. I want to say that always, that even when we look at the Homeric and Hesiodic poems themselves, they are part of a mixed up diasporic, hybridized world, but they are participating in that by resisting it.
Can I ask you a question? Have you considered the Homeric and Aphrodite, which I think is the oldest of the long poems, right? And this is a bit bouncing off of Paul's question, because it's very much of a meditation on mingling, right? The mingling that Aphrodite causes, it causes all these troubles in the universe, but then she's mingling with animals, and then she's forced to mingle with Anchises, and then they have this child, and the child is a source of shame for her because of the mingling, but he's going to go be raised by these mingling nymphs who aren't quite mortal and aren't quite immortal, and they have these mingling pine tree or whatever trees there, and so on. And so that's an old one, right? And maybe what Paul was saying, the kind of mingling we see, the sort of a little bit of anxiety about that in the Iliad, like when Sarpedon dies, and maybe Zeus wants to get involved, and that could cause all kinds of problems because of the mingling that happened on that level. Is that a way that there can be reflection with the sort of anxiety?
Divine human mingling is a real thing. I mean, that's again, the Catalogue of Women is used the phrase mingling in love repeatedly. In fact, the standard phrase is for human divine mingling. And that's, I mean, in the catalogue, it's not seen as necessarily destabilizing or problematic, because that's right. It's more about just how the hero roles, really. But in the Homeric to Aphrodite, it does seem to be something that is sort of divine human mingling is a separate case, but it is certainly a form of heterogeneous miscegenation that has its own tensions and problems attached to
There's
it.
some energy around here.
Yeah. It's actually interesting that in the classical period, so after Pericles' citizenship law in 451, the bastards, as they call them, are disenfranchised, and they have to go off to exercise in this gymnasium called Commissari, and there they seem to develop this sort of praise of Heracles in particular as a figure who, despite being mixed race, was nevertheless a figure of virtue. And this is sort of Antisthenes writes about this. Antisthenes, a very early philosopher of virtue, argues that virtue is when you can act in a virtuous way despite your family circumstances. So
your defensive pride and
So that's right, yeah. So Heracles, who is an example of the vertical mingling of human and divine, gets sort of shifted down onto the sort of horizontal level and becomes an example of Athenian and non-Athenian mingling. So yeah, allegorically, I think these divine human hybrids can function in all sorts of really interesting ways.
Last question, Jim?
Thank you, Dr. Whitmarsh. I've got too many ideas mingling in my head right now, so I'll try to be clear. Going back to this opposition between land and sea and the mythicized idea of the Bronze Age heroic figure in contrast to the archaic merchant. I'm wondering how you think the raid on the Cacones fit, the raid on the Cacones fits into that scheme. Because that's the first stop Odysseus makes with his fleet. He still has a fleet at that point when he's leaving Troy. And we learn, and he learned very painfully, that his status as a leader is characterized by inadequacy and shortcomings because his men do not follow his commands. Right? They stay the night and allows the locals to regroup and attack him. And he loses 6 men per ship. And it's from that point on that he turns his attention exclusively towards acquiring guest ships and engaging in Xenia. So does that suggest that, problems and perils with aspiring to being a Bronze Age heroic figure, that Xenia and guest ships can potentially act as a valid and viable alternative? And by the time he gets to the Phaeacians, he's said to have acquired more material wealth in the form of guest ships than he could have ever acquired at Troy. So it seems that there's something to be said for that pathway towards success.
Yeah, I mean, the Cacones are interesting, aren't they? Because they are still, notion in the real world before he goes into the world of fantastic things. So in that respect, they represent a form of activity that you could do as a group of Greeks in the real world. But it's not trading, obviously, it's pillaging. Now, when I don't know whether he shifts mentality at that point and decides to collect guest gifts instead of plunder. I don't think there's any.
Well, I've always tried to account for it from Odysseus being aware that he can't fully trust his men on raids from that point forward, and he never tries a raid ever again. Now he does know when he's talking to Penelope, he says, I'm going to have to conduct more raids to recoup the losses from the suitors. So raiding is still, and piracy is still, very much possible. But as far as the Ithacans who have accompanied him for the Trojan War, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can all go mingle for a second.